Welcome to HATV. I'm Scott Laird. Today we have joining us Dr. Joel Fuhrman. Dr. Fuhrman is an internationally recognized physician. He is an author. You may have seen him on PBS as well. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Fuhrman. What exactly do you define as superimmunity?
Well, we have to frame this with the idea that Americans have poor immunity, abnormal immunity, because the American diet doesn't supply them with the micronutrients necessary for normal immunity. What I consider superimmunity is really normal immunity, something we all have the right to have when we eat a diet that has the full level of micronutrients humans are supposed to get from natural food and the full breadth or spectrum so we're not deficient in any possible nutrients. We don't flood our body with toxic waste products. We don't eat low nutrient processed foods, and we eat the right quantity and quality of food we're supposed to be eating. Our immune system essentially gives us full protection against cancer. We don't have to get dangerous infections, and we can solve most of the healthcare problems that plague America.
You mentioned micronutrients. I think a lot of people may get confused though. What is the difference between a macronutrient and a micronutrient?
The word macro means big and micro means small. The macronutrients are the things we eat in large amounts, the big nutrients. And those are the nutrients that contain calories, fat, carbohydrate, and protein are considered the three macronutrients. But there also is a fourth macronutrient, and that's water. And we don't often consider that because we don't worry about it as much. But the bottom line here is Americans are consuming a dangerous amount of macronutrients. Americans are consuming too much fat, too much carbohydrate, and too much protein. And we have to reduce all three of them, obviously. At the same time, the American diet is grossly deficient in micronutrients. And in the 1930s and 1940s, most of the vitamins and minerals were first discovered. That was about 70 years ago, and people thought, wow, this is fantastic. We can take vitamin pills, we can add thiamine and riboflavin to Cocoa Puffs, we could add folic acid to Kool-Aid, and vitamin C to Kool-Aid. The point is that since the vitamin revolution came and people thought we could help people, cancer rates and autoimmune diseases skyrocketed at that point in human history and continue to climb worldwide right up until this point. Not solely because of taking synthetic vitamins, but because I think partially because people thought, well, now they can put these things added onto processed foods. We don't have to seek out the original source in natural food. And what happened in the last 20 years is we found out that every strawberry, every piece of broccoli, every blueberry doesn't just contain 30 nutrients. It contains thousands of nutrients, hundreds of thousands of nutrients, and that the major micronutrient load that's in food is not vitamins and minerals, it's phytochemicals. It's this extra class of micronutrients that scientists and food scientists didn't even consider 60 or 70 years ago. So the point is, we can't get what we need solely through a bottle. It exposes us to a lot of harmful ingredients, a lot of excess macronutrients, and an insufficient quality and variety of micronutrients that you really can only get through eating the high nutrient natural plant foods.
So if you were going to create the perfect diet to create cancer, to create low immunity, what would it be? What would be in that diet?
Yeah, I often say that the American-style diet, what is it, designed by the Taliban to kill us or something? It's like it's ideally designed to create a population with a medical care crisis that become demented, that get cancer, that develop heart disease, because the American diet is the prototype of the worst diet you could possibly eat. It says 62% of calories from processed foods. Now, processed foods, and when I wrote the book Eat to Live in 2003, it was only 52% of calories in processed foods. So this is now almost 10 years later, and I have to say 62% of calories in processed foods. So that means processed foods are things like sugar and white flour and oil and salt, bagels, cookies, rice cakes, breakfast bars, chips. We're eating soft drinks, pretzels, whatever it is people are eating. They're eating processed foods. And those processed foods are a source of macronutrients, with almost no micronutrient load and no antioxidants and no phytochemicals. And they're full of, and of course they're high glycemic, which promotes insulin, a higher level of insulin, which promotes fat storage, promotes angiogenesis, which means the growth of red blood vessels to fuel cellular replication, obesity, and cancer. And so it has the right lack of nutrients and hormonal milieu to promote cancer. And then another 26% of the American diet is animal products. And animal products also do not contain the phytochemicals and the antioxidants the processed foods are missing. So now you have, 62 plus 26. Now you have, almost, in the upper 80s, almost, 88% of the American diet is just a source of a macronutrient source with with a complete deficiency in micronutrients. The 10% or so of wheat, the 2 or 3% we eat of whole grains and the 10% we eat of fruits and vegetables is even half of that is white potato, and another part of that is ketchup. And so the amount of high nutrient vegetation Americans are eating is insignificant and not satisfactory to establish normal immune system protection against cancer. Added on to that is the fact that animal products promote a hormone called IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1. So just like sugar in white flour promotes insulin and raises risk of cancer, animal product intake promotes a hormone called IGF-1 that's due to the concentration of biological protein that promotes cellular replication, cell growth, and cancer as well. So we have a combination of the nutritional, you asked me the perfect diet to create a cancer epidemic. So we have both the macronutrient-micronutrient ratio to promote cancer, and we have the hormonal synergy, the right relationship of high IGF-1 and non-excess insulin that also promotes cancer. So the time a person gets to be 60 years old, they have cancer cells. The women have breast cancer cells in the breasts, and men have prostate cancer cells in the prostate. And you have cancer, the mammograms and the testing doesn't detect it yet because it's not large enough to be seen by the human eye, but almost all Americans have cancerous cells in their tissues because they're eating an American diet that's cancer promoting.
Can you explain what the glycemic index is and the best and worst foods on that scale in your terms?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. I think on the PowerPoint slide I showed a glycemic load, because the glycemic load is better than the glycemic index because it incorporates the serving size you would eat, not just the rating of the food, which refers to how much glucose and fructose flood the bloodstream after you eat a food. And basically, I'm showing people that natural foods have low glycemic loads. Natural foods like blueberries and strawberries and oranges have low glycemic. Even fruit has low glycemic load. And mostly carbohydrates mostly the healthy natural carbohydrates, like lentils and peas and beans, have very low glycemic index. And even squashes and spaghetti squash and have a low glycemic. The only natural food that has a high glycemic index pretty much is glycemic load is white potato. So even white rice has a high glycemic load, but not black rice or wild rice. So the point is that when we eat natural foods, we get those nutrients we need. We get the combination between the fiber, the resistant starch, and the low glycemic load makes those foods not have the same carbohydrate and insulin-promoting properties that white flour and sugar, and the processing of the food creates this huge glycemic load and flood into the bloodstream very rapidly. Just like when you process oils from a walnut, we make walnut oil instead of a walnut, or sesame oil instead of sesame seeds. Or when you take out the oil, it floods the body. It's absorbed very rapidly, as opposed to absorbing the fats and nuts and seeds, which you absorb very slowly. But when you eat the oil, it's absorbed very rapidly, and the body stores it away as fat because it can't burn it for energy. When we take it into a natural food, these calories come into the body over many hours, and the body mostly burns them instead of storing them, and the slow absorption speeds up fatty acid oxidation, utilization of the food, and you don't get the flood promoting fat storage hormones to be released like insulin-like growth factor 1, like angiogenesis promotions that promotes blood vessel growth into fat cells. So you don't have the same effects of the food. So the point is it's getting back to understanding what are the high nutrient foods and learning how we can design a diet style that maximally protects against heart disease, protects against stroke, protects against dementia in later life, and protects against all the cancers. And that's what this is all about.
You've come up with a great acronym for the healthiest foods called G-BOMBs. Can you explain what G-BOMBs are and why they are so powerful?
For your immune system special forces, G-BOMBs. So the G-BOMB stands for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. Greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. Because those are the foods that have dramatic protection against cancer. They support the immune system to a high degree. And if we look at every food, every one of those foods individually, we see between 55 and 85% reduction in cancer risk. Any one of those foods individually. Just give an example. Take S for seeds. Well, there was a study that showed that women who had breast cancer, they followed them for 10 years. These were already women who were diagnosed with breast cancer, so they had advanced disease. And that women who had a small amount of flax seeds, lignans in their diet, the lignans from flax seeds every day, had a 71% decreased risk of death over the 10-year period. And that's women who already had breast cancer. Imagine how protected it will be for women, because the earlier the pathology, the more protection you get. The later it advances, the less probability of reversing something. So even people who had breast cancer, 71% had a decreased mortality from breast cancer. Likewise, we see the same thing when we give populations raw onions, and we see between a 55 and 80% reduction of all known cancers. When people eat 28 servings of vegetables a week, they might decrease cancer risk by about a third. But if they eat just 5 servings of cruciferous green vegetables a week, they decrease cancer risk by about 40%. More than 28 servings of just regular vegetables. The point is, beans have powerful anti-cancer effects. The inositol pentacus phosphate in beans don't allow cells to replicate. There's all types of beans, greens, mushrooms. What study just showed that a Chinese study, women who had 10 grams of mushrooms a day, just one mushroom a day, had a 64% lower rate of breast cancer than women who didn't have mushrooms a day. And when you combine the greens, the green tea of the greens with the mushrooms, the reduction in breast cancer risk went down to 89%, reduction in breast cancer risk. The point I'm making, greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. Berries don't allow cells to have been shown to prevent viral replication, help reverse viral diseases, and actually to cause reversal of even early stage cancers. Now, what about when we eat all these foods in our diet? Why don't we combine them together? And that's my whole mission, is to tell people that we can win the war on cancer in America. This is not pie in the sky craziness. The cancer rates were 90% lower in countries like Korea just 20 years ago. Why can't we duplicate what primitive countries have? We're not primitive. Nutritional science has advanced so far today that we could put together the portfolio of high cancer, these cancer protection foods, to give the ability that we can win the war on cancer, we can give women the power to control their risk of cancer and stop this nonsense looking for magic pills and fairy tales and thinking mammograms and early diagnostic techniques is going to save us, because it's not going to save us. It hasn't saved us, hasn't changed anything particularly, much. And we have to give people the right information. They've got to change the way they eat. They've got to get in great health. They've got to get fit. And they've got to stop expecting doctors to save them with a pill.
So these G-bombs are for everyday eating?
If our whole population did that, can you imagine the difference in healthcare we'd have in America?
I imagine we wouldn't need it. We would all be healthy.
I'm 70%, certainly 70% of our medical care expenditures could be wiped out.
Is there anything we have not talked about yet that you think people need to know to be healthy?
Well, we focused mostly on superimmunity and cancer, but the only thing we haven't talked about is likewise, which is the same benefits that support your immune system, protect you against cancer, also accelerate the reversal of heart disease, lower your blood pressure, and prevent you from having a heart attack or a stroke. So it's not one special diet for preventing against cancer and a whole new parameters of food that lowers your risk of heart disease and takes away your blood pressure and stroke issues. It's the same thing. So we just got to make it clear that, that superior nutrition is truly therapeutic and protective and most important subject people need to know in this country. They don't learn it in school, and the information they get from the media is all mixed up. And it's very critical that our whole population is on this together, because we're not going to get this from Washington. We have to do it it has to be a grassroots organization. We have to do it ourselves, because the information we get from medical authorities and government is influenced by food manufacturers, drug companies, and is commercially, and even the TV shows, commercial TV, is commercially influenced information.
All right, thank you, Dr. Furman, and thank you for joining us on HATV. I'm Scott Laird.